ranges assigned to it, which means that errors and problems can be much more easily recognized, whereas chart B has very wide ranges, and this gives us a false perception of performance. So errors cannot be as easily identified on chart B, and this leads to the release of inaccurate patient results. So this is a fairly straightforward example here where we have a mean of 100 and our acceptable ranges either way. We have seen examples where instrument manufacturers' controls have ranges of plus and minus up to 40% of target value. So it would be incredibly hard to actually fall outside of the acceptable range. So very important then that the targets and ranges we are using are accurately assigned. So according to ISO, the most accurate targets and ranges you can use will be using your lab's own running mean, so assigning your own target values and ranges. However, it's also important to make sure that you're using controls from a manufacturer that already provide accurate targets and ranges. So is your material disguising QC errors or pointing them out more clearly? Obviously, we run quality control for the sole purpose of detecting errors, so we don't want to use something that's actually going to conceal errors from us and do the exact opposite of what it was intended to do. So the next thing we have to look out for is QC material that reacts to the examining system in a manner as close as possible to the patient samples. So again, that's another ISO 15489 requirement, and we term this commutability. So commutability is just the degree to which a control behaves like a patient sample. So the idea here is if you're going to be testing human patient samples, you want to use human controls. It just makes sense. You know, if you're testing human patient samples, you wouldn't use a bovine control or some other kind of animal-based control to test your system. So basically it needs to react, your control needs to react in the exact same way, and your IQC should be commutable. So we've got a couple of case studies. So in this next case study, we were looking for creatinine commutability, and we looked at shifts in 3 different manufacturers' control material and patient results when shifting batches of reagent. So it's important to remember that when we change our reagent batch, there will generally be a slight shift in the performance of our patient results. So this chart here, we can see from control manufacturer 1, so these 2 highlighted results at the top here, we can see between 2 different reagent batches how much the shift was. And in the far right-hand side column, we can see how significant that shift was. So for the first lot, there was a negative 8.1% shift in performance after the reagent batch was changed. And for the second lot, there was a plus 6.6% shift when that batch was changed. Then for control manufacturer 2, we can see that they actually had very, very small shifts between reagent batch changes. So the first shift was 1.5%, the second shift was 0.2, so barely anything at all, which you would think is what we're going for. However, then we look at the Randosx human chemistry level 2 control, and we see that the shift between reagent batch was 2.3%. So it's actually a little bit higher than control manufacturer 2. However, whenever we tested the 10 patient serum values, we could see that they also had a slight shift between the change of reagent batch, and the mean bias shift was 2.6%. So this shows that the control that most closely reflected what the patient samples were seeing was the Randosx control with 2.3%. And that, again, is the main thing that we want to take away. A lot of people would think instinctually that we want a control that doesn't shift very much at all whenever we change reagent batch, whereas we actually want a control that will closely mimic what our patient samples are doing. So it's important to look out for material that is in a format that is suitable for use. So generally, when it comes to quality control, there are 3 different formats. We have lyophilized, just freeze-dried material. we have liquid frozen and liquid ready to use. So generally for hot countries, particularly like Malaysia, liquid frozen is not so popular because it has to be shipped on dry ice and has to be kept frozen at all times, which can become quite expensive to actually deliver that QC product. So lyophilized or liquid ready to use would probably be the better formats for countries like Malaysia. So it is important to remember as well to look out for a QC material that covers the full clinical range. Again, according to ISO, they state that the laboratory should choose concentrations of control materials wherever possible, especially at or near clinical decision-making values, which ensures the validity of the decisions made. So it makes sense if you were running an assay and the diagnostic cutoff was, say, 20 milligrams per deciliter. If a patient was over that level, they had disease X. If they were under that level, they were fine. Obviously, that 20 is incredibly important to monitor to make sure that we are accurately reporting results at that significant range. So that's what we want to do with our control materials. So it's particularly important to make sure that clinicians are making the correct decisions, whether yes, we should treat this patient, or no, this patient does not require treatment. So the next thing we need to think about is lot-to-lot variations. So we go to pains to make sure that our own manufacturing procedures are as consistent as possible. So if we have a look at our TSH test, for example, so we can see the Randosx control values on the left-hand side and values from a well-known manufacturer on the right-hand side. So control manufacturer 1 does not cover the 0.1 or 0.27 units per mil decision levels of TSH. So that means that values fall just below the normal range of 0.4 to 0.5. So that clinically significant range is not being covered with control manufacturer 1 on the right-hand side. So to compensate for these inadequacies, they offer an additional low-level TSH control at an additional expense. And control manufacturer 1 for vitamin B12, they do not cover the 190 picomoles per litre decision level, and again, that's compensated by offering a separate anemia control, which again comes at an extra expense. So for ferritin, the same thing is a problem here. For ferritin control manufacturer 1, the levels are far too high in their level 1 control, which means they're going to need an additional control to look after their ferritin. So the third thing we need to consider is to look out for a control that matches its stability claims. So this comes into play with lot-to-lot variation as well. So imagine you went to the shop and you purchased a loaf of bread, and that loaf of bread was good, it would last for 7 days. And you think, okay, that's perfect. So you eat your bread, which is good for 7 days. Then the next week you go back to the same shop and you buy the exact same brand of bread, and it turns out it's only stable for 3 days. After that, it goes off, it goes blue moldy, it goes bad. So you wouldn't be very happy. Why has that bread now become less stable? And this is the same thing we need to consider with our controls. So we have an example here from control manufacturer 1. Again, this is a well-known third-party control manufacturer. So they have released 4 lots of the exact same control. And these controls have pretty significant differences between each of these 4 lots. So we can see for the first lot of control, all analytes were claimed to be stable for 90 days while this control product was thawed and unopened, with the exception of rheumatoid factor, which was stable for 25 days. Then, the next lot of the exact same control, they saw that all analytes had their stabilities reduced to 45 days. And with the exception of rheumatoid factor, which was then decreased to a 10-day stability. And we can see that that trend continues throughout lots 3 and 4. Now there has been an additional claim for beta-2 microglobulin, which is now only stable for 41 days. So we can see in our additional limitations on the right-hand side, For lots 1 and 2, there were no additional limitations, whereas for lots 3 and 4, ApoA1 may increase over the shelf life. So that means the longer the customer is using that product, the higher their ApoA1 values will become. And the chances are that that APO issue also occurred in lots 1 and 2. It just took this manufacturer a while to realize that that was the issue. So again, not the most consistent product in the world. So these are all the things we need to think about when choosing a good quality control. So I read an article by Westgard recently, and they said it's possible to do the right QC wrong and to do the wrong QC right. So what do they mean by that? What they mean is you can buy the most high quality control product in the world, and you can use it in the wrong way. Similarly, you can buy a very cheap QC product that isn't very good, and you can use it in exactly the right way. But if you do either of those things, the results you're going to get will not be very good. A little example of how that works is I used to be a big fan of golf a couple of years ago. I used to play golf a lot with some of my friends. And so my friends and I went out for a round of golf, and we started to tee off. And a gentleman came up to us and he said, "Do you mind if I join you for the round?" We said, "Yes, of course, come with us." So we all started to tee off, and he produced these clubs out of his bag, which were fantastic, high quality clubs, must have cost him a fortune. So my friend and I thought, okay, this guy means serious business. He's probably going to be like Tiger Woods. But he was terrible. Couldn't hit the ball 5 yards. Wasn't very good at all. So